So I'm Gualberto Garcia Jones, the president of the Personhood Alliance, and I'm here with Sarah Quale.
And I'm the president of Personhood Alliance Education.
So welcome to our video podcast. We'll be putting this podcast up on our website as soon as we have that ready. We'll also be putting it on iTunes and the Google Store Android version of the Apple products. So hopefully you'll be able to get access to this and share it. Today we have an interesting topic that we want to discuss. I think it's really the main thing that's keeping the pro-life movement, that has been keeping the pro-life movement from advancing for a very long time, and it is the opposition from within the movement itself.
Yeah, I would agree with that. I think that when you look over time and you look at the last 50 years in particular, since abortion started to be legalized at the state level, and then of course in 1973 with the Supreme Court, I think that you watch the history of that and you see the movement at the beginning and what it attempted to do in terms of personhood, in terms of just restoring that immediately after Roe was decided. And then you look at how that was compromised. You know, within the first decade, I think after Roe, it really started to fall away. And then since then has really just been a single focused strategy at the national level that's done a lot of damage to the movement.
Yeah. And you know, some of the same actors have been around from the very beginning.
Right.
And I personally have been involved full-time in the pro-life movement for about 15 years now, which is a lot, is way too long. I wish it were shorter. But you know, some of these people, like Mr. James Bopp, who we're going to be talking about today, he's the general counsel for National Right to Life. He's been at it as the head of this national organization since 1978. So literally my entire life, he has been at the head of this organization. And so it's about him that I think we're going to talk about today, and specifically about the testimony that he gave. Incredible testimony. He flew all the way to Tennessee to testify in front of their Senate. And this is incredible. He didn't fly out there as the head of National Right to Life to support a pro-life bill. I think, you know, that probably wouldn't be important enough for him. He went out there to actually shoot down a pro-life bill. It was a bill that basically was a modified heartbeat bill with a very interesting modification, which is basically to redefine viability to mean living and alive. So not just the point when the baby can survive outside the womb, which is how the pro-aborts defined it, but to mean viability, meaning alive. And so really it was a really solid, no compromise, complete abortion ban. And here's the head of National Right to Life who comes to Tennessee and tells the senators, don't support this.
Yeah, and if you watch that testimony, and LifeSite News has an edited version, it's about 4 minutes long. If you watch that, it's very interesting how paralyzed by fear Mr. Bopp is. And that really is, to me, the main sense that I get is that we cannot do anything except this one thing that we've been trying to do over the last 4 decades. Now it's failed, and there are many ways, many things that we can point to in terms of saying that it failed, right? So we can objectively look at it, the strategy of waiting till the court is stacked with pro-life justices, and I'm talking about the Supreme Court, until we can overturn Roe. The pro-life movement is in prison, and it really is a prison. And unless we keep that strategy going, there's nothing else we can do. And in fact, if we don't, if we think of other things, if we go for a bill like Tennessee has, then we're going to dismantle everything the pro-life movement has worked for in the last 4 decades. And there really is this sense of fear. He used words like dangerous
Hmm.
He even said, we can't walk casually into something like this, as if the people in Tennessee, the senator who sponsored this, the doctors, the pastors, the activists, everybody who's been supporting this and working on this bill, as if they're casually walking into this somehow, right? It
Right.
was really astonishing to me, the amount of fear mongering that Mr. Bopp did.
Yeah. And there's a real sense of hubris in his entire strategy, right? I think because he's been around since 1978 at the head of the side of the movement that seeks to chip away at Roe or pass sort of not quite perfect bills. We would like to call it pro-choice with exceptions type bills. Since
Right.
he's been at the head of this movement, I think he identifies his legacy, his life's work as these bills. And so God forbid anybody tries to go out of the formula that he has devoted his life to. That to him I think is a cardinal sin. And so he says things like losing is not cost free.
Right.
um, and I would say, yes, we are well aware of that. After almost 50 years, we're aware that it's about 60 million lives not cost free, and that's
Yeah.
why we want to end it now. Another thing that he really emphasizes is, as you said, the need, instead of trying to challenge the status quo, challenge the abortion jurisprudence, he says first we need to change the Supreme Court.
Right.
And that sounds that sounds reasonable, right? And obviously at every single election we hear the same thing. In fact, I in some ways I believe it. I think it would be great if we had a better Supreme Court. The question is, how do we get that better Supreme Court? And I think he says he tells you exactly what he thinks the solution is, and he says it's 4 more years of Trump and it's
Yep.
more Republicans in the Senate. But
Right.
there's a big problem with that. And I myself am going to support Trump. I know not everybody's going to. I know he's not perfect. I didn't support him in the past, but I'm going to support him because I think in the overall picture, I think he's appointing good people. But beside that, the the idea that appointing a Republican president is going to change the Supreme Court and is going to overturn Roe is crazy. We just have to look at what's happened in the past, right?
Yeah, and exactly. And Mr. Bopp says, I think, and I wrote it down, there is no objective evidence that we have more than one vote to overturn Roe.
Exactly.
Now, that would be Thomas, I'm assuming. He doesn't call him by name, right? But that's Thomas. It's Clarence Thomas.
Right.
Clarence Thomas was confirmed in 1991. That was 28 years ago. So if this is a winning strategy, how much longer do I have to wait as a pro-life American who wants to stop the injustice of abortion now? I'm going to have to wait. If one justice takes 28 years in order to be qualified as objective evidence,
Mhm.
right? How much longer? It will never end.
Right. And
It will
actually,
never end.
Sarah, if you look at the Roe versus Wade decision itself,
Yeah,
that was a 7-2 decision.
right.
Okay. So after 20 something years, we're up to having one judge, I
Right.
guess, not sorry, not 20 something, 40 something years. We're up to having one judge. So we're actually going backwards.
We
And
are.
quite frankly, I think everybody would agree that the cultural tension that is necessary for this to happen is not increasing, but it's decreasing. And
Right.
so I think we are going backwards. I think we're going backwards because we have grown complacent. We put all of our hope and all of our sense of urgency. We've delegated that. It's kind of like how
Yes.
Congress was supposed to be the strongest branch, but slowly it's been delegating that to the executive. And so now you have these bureaucracies that run everything. Well, I think the American people and pro-lifers have done the same thing. We've said, okay, we don't want to obviously start a civil war. We don't want to have a revolution, and the other side isn't going to give an inch. And
No.
so So, the only thing we can do is go to the Supreme Court and elect more Republicans. Well,
Right.
newsflash for everybody. If you've ever been on the Hill and you've gone to Republicans, they're about as interested in repealing Roe as they are in, running a marathon in the summer in DC. They're not going to do it because it's politically costly. And why is it
Yes.
politically costly? Because there's no sense of urgency. So it's,
Right.
and I think this is important because when we look at who James Bopp is, he is a monolith inside the pro-life movement. He's recognized as the, pro-life attorney par excellence. But he's actually, his specialty, his bread and butter is as a RNC operative and as an attorney that deals with campaign finance. And so he is the ultimate establishment guy.
Interesting.
And I don't want to judge his, his soul, his intentions, but in terms of his job as an RNC leader and as a campaign finance guy, if abortion, the status quo never changed, that'd be the best thing in the world because it's a way to get all of the sheep, the Christian sheep out there to go vote Republican year after year and to give money year after year. And then that money, of course, is used to further finance the party. And so he's a party apparatchik.
Yeah, and I think that we have to always remember that the solution to abortion does have a political component. I think that there are two levels, right? There's the legal political level and there's the grassroots level, and both of those levels are necessary. But to have such an imbalance where there is only one strategy that is allowed at the national level, which is to try to somehow stack the Supreme Court to eventually overturn Roe, I think that is dangerous. I think that's the dangerous thing, that, like you said, we put so much weight in, like, okay, well, me as a grassroots person, me as a Christian in the culture, and I'm battling that in a different way. So I'm trusting that the political and the legal issues are going to be solved by the people who are supposed to solve them, and they're not being. And in fact, they're shutting down the grassroots who have risen up to come into the political sphere, to do it differently and to do it biblically, to push forward personhood, to push forward an absolute ban on abortion, which is what we all want. I'm sure it's what the National Right to Life wants. I mean, I know we hear all the time about, well, they're just there to, pay their bills and keep the lights on, and they really don't want to do anything. And there's all this talk about the money that's involved. And I think that there probably is some of that, but I tend to think that there are really good-hearted people at the National Right to Life that really believe that this is the right direction, and that they're just trusting in their attorney, right? Or their group of attorneys. And there are a lot of grassroots people that I've seen since the story came out about Tennessee that literally just say, you know what, we just need to trust that they're going to do the right thing. We need to trust our leadership. And it's almost like a blind deception, because I think we've been trained over many decades just to say, you know what, they're going to handle it. They're going to take care of it while we're doing what we need to do down here. And
Right.
What we're finding out again and again is that that's just not true. And when we try to come into that other sphere by raising up good Christian men and women, that we are shut down. And that's just not a good sign.
Right. Right. And, going back to the whole strategy of just appointing judges, do you know how many judges had been appointed by Republicans when Casey was decided? And Casey, of course, was the second generation of Roe. It's the current undue burden standard.
Right.
So eight of the 9 who decided Casey, who kept the abortion business going and the killing going, were appointed by Republicans. So, how is that a viable strategy?
It's not.
Right. And so, this kind of, it goes back to me, it goes back to the idea that abortion is not a legal problem. We can't out-lawyer the other side into accepting the respect for life, into accepting the protection of innocent human beings. You can't convince them any more than you could have convinced a Southern slaveholder to actually abolish slavery.
Right.
This is a core, almost existential, almost religious belief for the other side. And, in the magical world that's never going to happen, that you had enough Justice Thomases on the Supreme Court to decide this question in favor of the right to life. Can you imagine what would happen the day when a decision like that comes down that says that, abortion is outlawed? I believe it'd be an instant civil war, basically, an instant insurrection, burning of courthouses, feminazis running wild. I'm sure there would be violence. And so when you think of that kind of opposition to what we believe is right and just, and you think of what NRLC is suggesting, how we fight that kind of fire, that we fight it with the type of passivity and I think ingenuity of saying, we're just gonna keep doing this thing, this electing people who have no interest, who are not going to put their political careers in danger. It's just
Right.
crazy.
Yeah, it's like taking on those little droplets, those little medicine droplets on a forest fire.
Yeah.
It is. It's like that's how out of scale the strategy is with the reality that abortion is a sacrament for the left. It is. And I'm so glad that you brought up the religious part of it, because I want to counter that religious part on the left with something that Bopp said in his testimony. And I wrote it down because I was actually kind of shocked by it. So I'm going to read it. He says, "Divine intervention is God's decision, not ours. He will do it in his time when he believes the time is right." Right? Oh, sure. I agree with that. Absent divine intervention, we have to use our human reason and our human powers to figure out what is the best course. So essentially, if you take that and you understand the sense that Mr. Bopp has, that he's putting forward this fear, basically what he's saying is God wants us to sit here paralyzed in fear until the time he decides that he's going to end abortion. I don't know about you, but I don't think that's the way God works. I think God works in many different ways and many, many mysterious ways that we just don't understand. But the God I know is not going to say, I want you to be in this place of fear so that someday I'm going to do something. Right? This is innocent blood that's being shed on a massive scale in this country. And to say that, well, we just have to wait for the Lord. And by the way, as we're waiting for him to divinely come down and decide to end this, we should just sit here and do the same thing that we've done for 50 years, which has really had no benefit whatsoever. You are basically cutting off the power of God. And the power of God is strategies like Tennessee that are brought into the sphere of politics that God will bless. He will bless it.
I think that in his hubris, he thinks the power of God and the will of God is to use his strategy. I do think he's blinded to the fact that his strategy has failed for the last 50 years and that the world is becoming a more and more secular place. And the places where children in the womb are safe are becoming, smaller and smaller islands.
They are.
I think and I think it is pure hubris on his part. But, clearly, this is not a legal solution. So as a pro-life movement, I think I'm an attorney, right? I went to law school because when I was, having my formative thoughts on this question, I thought, well, Roe versus Wade is kind of at the core of it. And so combating Roe versus Wade is one of the crucial things. I think since then, since becoming an attorney and investing all that time into it, I think it's been useful because you can understand some of the roots, the legal roots, but really this is a religious and a philosophical, a cultural, societal question. The legal side, you're going to have attorneys capable of arguing anything. And surely the pro-life attorneys that are out there can justify not doing anything. They're really good at that. They've been doing that for a long time. And so the solution has to be something different. We can't look to James Bopp Esquire or Gualberto Garcia Jones Esquire to change these things. I think we have to look at what is right. And in the realm of what is right, as Christians, we look to God, we look to the Bible, we look to the commandments, and that is where our faith has to be put. And it's not implying that if we do X, then Y is going to happen, but it is saying, we know that we have to do this part, and then yes, what the result will be is in God's hands, as everything in the future is.
Right.
But it's unmistakable that taking the life of an innocent baby is wrong. And so let's take that approach of saying it's always wrong. And so this idea that, the only thing we can do is accept a little evil, I think is so damaging. Look, I don't know, think back to an example of the American independence, right? Like, you think of why did this nation come to be in the first place? And it was over something, as simple as taxation on its face. Of course, it was more about liberty. But the original, the founding fathers, these patriots, what they saw was that if you go down the road of accepting, the Stamp Act, the tea taxes, taxes on tea importation, that you're going down the road of tyranny.
Right.
And so the people stood up. They petitioned the king. They did that many, many times. And it's one of the things in the Declaration of Independence that Thomas Jefferson wrote, right? That all of their petitions have gone unanswered. But eventually they said enough is enough. And so I think it's that enough is enough. That's the backbone to every major change in society.
Yes.
And it was the abolitionists in the 1800s that said enough is enough. We had some of these founding fathers, George Washington, Patrick Henry, who were slave owners, and they recognized the evil of slavery, but they didn't know how to extricate themselves from it. And I almost feel like our judges and politicians are the pro-life ones are like slave owners. They're in a system. That's their livelihood. That's where their reputation is being built. And they just don't know how to extricate themselves from it. Because, challenging the system means challenging their livelihood. And so I really think it's a time for the base to step up and to just say, no, we're not going to accept a Supreme Court precedent that is clearly unjust, clearly evil. We're not going to enforce it. And so that's one of the things we've been talking about in the Personhood Alliance with the sanctuary cities.
Right. Yeah, and I think that really is going to be the solution going forward. If we're looking at, and I'm just gonna say again, if we're looking at this point in history, having one Supreme Court justice that we could count on for a vote to overturn Roe after all of this time, then I'm just going to turn away from that nonsense and I'm going to come back to the things that I can actually impact. And that is my local community. That's the people who are in my community that I can reach out and help. That's the local level, city or county managers, commissioners, officials, whatever they are, to call them to account, to put them on the spot and say, look, if you believe this is the area that we can start to impact and we can do something. And we're not just going to say we're going to do something and declare ourselves a sanctuary for life. We're actually going to put that into action so that when we're ready, right, when we've built the network, when we've built the community, we've built this this service and support, and we've gotten the churches back out into the street, and we've gotten all of these different organizations working together at the local level. When we're ready and mature enough, and our local officials have enough conviction and courage, then we're actually going to say, we will not allow abortion here. And we will make sure of that legally through ordinances, through statutes, through pulling funding away from things as all those tentacles get into the local level as well. And so that phased approach, I think, is what's really important, because we're not just saying we're not going to do this. We're saying we're not going to do it, and here's how we're not going to do it, and here's what we're going to build up instead. And it's really building that culture of life that will take down abortion, regardless of whatever happens to Roe.
And I want to emphasize something you just said, and that is courage.
Yeah.
Courage is what is lacking at every level of the pro-life movement. I have to say the only real source of courage that I see is the Red Rose Rescue in the pro-life movement. I think it's something that we need our pro-life leadership to recognize. We don't need a wiser than God legal strategy. It's pretty clear, the commandment to not murder. It doesn't require, a brain surgeon or a Harvard law graduate to tell you that, that killing an innocent child is in violation of that. We need the courage to stand up and say no. And when the court comes down, we need the courage to say, go ahead and enforce it. And if that means losing your house, it means losing your house. If it means losing your job in the city council, it means losing your job. If it means for a community to actually take a hit, well, then we take a hit. That's what Christians have been doing, since the very early days of the church. And
That's
through that, through the blood of the martyrs, you have the birth of liberty, and you have justice. And so I think we have just played it safe for way too long. I'm not saying that we become an anarchical society by any means. We have elected officials to enforce laws, but there also has to be a check. The government, to some extent, has to be a little bit afraid of the people. And that's why, as an aside, I think the Second Amendment is so important, because we are not just sheep at the mercy of the government and those who are in power. We're empowered individuals. And so as part of our government, I think we need to find Christian ways. And of course, that does not involve, violence against innocent people. But it does involve a lot of courage. And so we cannot equate being Christian with being passive.
And I think that's really good.
Yeah, and we've been doing that, I think, for way too long. I think all of us are at fault. I think we've been hammering on James Bopp, and he certainly deserves to get hammered. But, all of us, I think it takes a lot of courage, and we have to find a way to build that. We need prayer and fasting. We need to ask God to inspire us, and to give us that courage, because certainly nothing in this world is geared towards the type of sacrifice that we know is going to be required to get rid of this evil.
Yeah, I think that's really well said. And the only thing I would add is that this idea of anarchy being, well, if we push against this, we're calling for anarchy. It's actually the opposite. Roe is anarchy. And to ignore it as an unjust law that it is to return to law and order in this country. And it's to remember that our purpose for coming together in the first place hundreds of years ago as the several colonies was to say, we have this idea of self-government, and it's so different than that anything that's been done in the history of the world. And why? And the divine inspiration that went into that, and the stories that you see. I don't know if you've ever you probably have read or seen documentaries on the things that happened, the divine intervention that happened to so many different separate people on the way here. Just the stories about, God's hand coming in to so many people's lives so that America could be birthed. And there was a reason for that. And we have to get back to that. We have to understand that that is our heritage and that is our legacy, that the power lies in God, who then blesses the people for doing his will. And for Jim Bopp to say that we just have to, God is divine. Yes, he is. But waiting decades to stack a court, God's not going to, that's not his will. And I know that's a bold thing for me to say because no one really knows. But again, there are innocent people, innocent children made in his image that are being killed every day. And this is just not how you put a stop to it. And God's not going to bless that effort. If he was going to bless that effort, do you think that it would be a lot faster? we would actually not be going backwards. We would see the fruits of that many years of labor. We would see that, and we're not seeing it at all.
And that is not to say again that we disengage from the political world. Right. As I mentioned before, I'm planning on voting for Trump because I've seen it's had an effect on a lot of good people that have been appointed. I just think that is a very tiny part of what needs to happen, right? Having a Republican Senate, for the most part, is good in terms of of liberty and of some social policy. I guess in terms of the acceleration or deceleration of our downfall into into socialism. But again, that is a almost, I would say, a minor or insignificant part of what actually needs to happen. We really need to have a revival of the people. Because if we don't, then we are already in a tyrannical government. We have a overwhelming political and judicial spheres that have accepted judicial supremacy. And what is judicial supremacy but just tyranny in robes, right? These guys have an ongoing constitutional convention to decide the most important questions of our time. How is that different from King George and his cabinet deciding things for us? We don't have a say in whether, the definition of marriage. I mean, 30-something states tried to have a say, and then the Supreme Court came and axed that. And our politicians, I remember Marco Rubio saying, well, it's the law of the land. It's like, no, it's not. The law of the land is the Constitution. And the law of the land says that you should have a little bit more of a spine and stand up to these judges because you also are a representative of the people. And so I think, again, it goes back to courage. And in the constitutional sense, you need checks and balances. We're not talking anarchy here. There is space in between anarchy and tyranny, and that's the rule of law. And so we've departed from the rule of law, and we live under a tyranny. And so people need to wake up, and they need to start finding ways to not cooperate with the tyrants, with the tyranny.
Yeah, and I think the good people of Tennessee have started to do that, and there's other places around the country. The affiliates of Personhood Alliance certainly are leading that charge, and that's just going to continue. And that's what the good news is today, is that there is enough. It's happening right now, and the movement is building, and there's a groundswell, and we're just seeing so many blessings coming out of so many places right now. Real blessings where God is just unleashing his power on the people to make change. And it will keep going. It's like a river flow. And that is not going to stop by anybody at the national level, no matter how many states they visit to squash it. It's just not going to happen.
Right. And, evil we know will not triumph. We know that relativistic societies end up falling apart. And so I think we have to be ready to build. One of the things I find interesting in looking at how Christianity spread is that, when the Roman Empire was falling apart, it was these Christian communities, a lot of times in times of great plagues and great misery, the love that these Christian communities had towards perfect strangers because of the brotherhood under Christ was what really allowed for Christendom to be built, for the West to be built, and for the liberties, the setting where we have the types of liberties and stability that we have today. But we see that that's eroding very, very quickly. And so really we're called, to try to build the kingdom here, and to try to prepare people for these tough times, because the Supreme Court's is not going to step in and fix everything. As we destroy the family, as we continue to destroy our own generations, we see things like population growth. And I don't want to get too doomsday-ish here, but we have I think it was Elon Musk just the other day who came out and said that what we all know in the conservative world, that you have this inverted pyramid where people are not having children, and so you're having a very top-heavy old generation that's being supported by fewer and fewer younger people, and so you have all of these things that are just weakening and weakening society. You have this incredible debt that we labor under, that we're passing on to our younger generations, and soon things will break, and so in the course of history, you have these things that we can control and things that we can't control. And I think the things that we can control is our own actions, is our own principled stance. If a legislator is watching this, the way you vote is what you can control. How the Supreme Court is going to vote on something is out of our power. And so I think when we have something as clear as not endorsing murder of innocent people, you have to make that a non-negotiable.
Right. Yeah, that is definitely a non-negotiable. Right. I mean, there is so much darkness that has come over America and over the world. And you can watch it happen in different countries when abortion is legalized. And it really brings, in Old Testament terms, it does bring a curse upon the land. And it is, murder is a sin of the heart. And this is a heart issue. And a heart issue needs transformation that only Jesus can bring, that only God can do. And so we have to be following that. We have to put that as our number one. We have to focus on his will. We have to make sure our ways align with his ways. And I think that really, to me, is the most important takeaway from National Right to Life coming in to a state to tell it that it should remain in fear, because the strategy that has clearly failed needs to fail a little bit longer. And it makes no sense. It is not divine. And it's something that I think needs to be fixed. It won't be necessarily fixed from the top down, I believe. And I believe that from the bottom up is how it will happen. And as I said, is happening already on a massive scale.
Right. Yeah. I'm just personally as a guy, I'm sick of bowing to tyrants. And as an attorney, I'm sick of bowing to to what is clearly a manipulated interpretation of the Constitution. And so, I just think we need to kind of erase the chalkboard, right? And just go straight to what we know is true. And unfortunately, we have a lot of establishment pro-lifers with a big voice and a big reputation, like Jim Bopp, attacking anybody who goes against that. And that's what we saw in Tennessee. It's something that a lot of people are not aware of. This is National Right to Life, folks. We have several affiliates in the Personhood Alliance that were either kicked out or had to leave National Right to Life because they actually were too pro-life for National Right to Life.
Yes.
And so I think, through every effort that we can in education, we have to remind people of the need to hold true, to hold fast to our principles, to not compromise. It is so tempting to compromise when you get involved in politics. We've seen it with even with bills that are supported by a lot of people who we like the heartbeat bills, right? The the heartbeat bills, a lot of them are bad bills.
Yeah.
There, I said it. Okay.
Yeah.
Hate me for it, but it's true because
It's true.
they lower the bar from life begins at conception, which is what we all know and believe, to, hey, here's this emotive moment that as parents, you and I are parents, and we remember the amazing, feeling at seeing the heartbeat of our child. But just because we saw the heartbeat or heard the heartbeat doesn't mean that that there was no child there before, and that we shouldn't be trying to protect that child before the heartbeat. So, anyways, I put that out there because I think it's important that we are honest, and that we really we don't take political sides and make this into just a game of whacking people that we don't like. There are people that we really like who get the temptation to compromise, and I've written about this. I myself in the past have succumbed to that temptation to compromise, to try to achieve political things, and it's just it was very clear in my case that God told me like, get away from that.
Yeah. Right.
And so, we need to get away from people like Jim Bopp in the pro-life movement, and we need to embrace, strategies that are more local, that allow us to really stand up, that don't condition everything on, what our human intuition says a corrupt group of judges is going to decide. So, I think it's really, really important that we expose people like Jim Bopp, who go into a state and try to crush a pro-life bill.
Yeah, and you brought up heartbeat bills, and I will just say that the Tennessee bill is called a heartbeat bill, but it's different, and you addressed that at the beginning. It really has a lot of personhood elements in it, and typically what we see in heartbeat bills aren't just this idea of the heartbeat detects life, but we rely on the abortionist to be the one to detect the heartbeat. There are often, almost always, exceptions for rape and incest, for disability, for whatever. And so those are flawed bills, and they provide education, they provide emotion to attract people to the preborn child, but they actually can be negative in terms of our message being inconsistent, once again, with what we are putting out there politically. It does move the bar way back from viability or from paying capability, right? But it still is an incremental step that is often very flawed, as we have seen.
Right. And again, I think it's focusing on the Supreme Court, right? Why is the heartbeat bill used? I think it's probably 50-50. It's 50% the fact that it's meeting people in a culture that's completely secularized and full of abortion nonsense at a point where maybe they can engage emotionally and with some level of reasoning. But it's also really what you talked about, trying to push that viability, getting past the viability standard and going to, I guess, a heartbeat standard, but that is not God's standard. And so it's inherently going to be problematic. And obviously with the advent of chemical abortions, a lot of abortions are done. In some countries, I think in France, a majority of abortions are done, in the very early stages through chemical abortions. Mm-hmm. And so at the end of the day, it's not going to answer the real issue, which is, an issue of protecting the life that we know is there from the beginning.
Right. Absolutely.
So would you say, Sarah, that Jim Bopp is enemy number one to the pro-life movement? Is that uncharitable?
I wouldn't say that personally Jim Bopp is, but I would say that the fear-mongering that he puts out and the strategy that he carries forward with him are the enemies. Okay. For sure. Yeah.
That's fair enough. All right. Well, this is a topic that I think has been sort of at the core of the struggle within the pro-life movement for a very, very long time, right? The struggle between those people that have a very legalistic, political view of what the pro-life movement should be versus people who have a more principled view of what the pro-life movement should be. And so it's something that I'm sure we're going to be talking about more in the future. There's some people that have been there on the other side of Jim Bopp since the very beginning, since before I was born. And I think it'd be cool to have them at a future date on here to kind of tell us a little bit of that background, because to a lot of people, a lot of new pro-lifers, they don't know that, that this division exists. They don't know how harmful it's been. In fact, I don't know if you know this, but my first job offer that I got after graduating from law school was with National Right to Life. I was looking, and this was after having gone through law school. And so I don't, I want to put it out there that, it's not like we're better than anybody else. I think we've had the benefit of having people who have taught us about these dangers. And so it's the same thing that we're trying to teach other people. And so in my case, I looked around Washington, D.C., where I went to law school, and I looked at the different pro-life organizations that had job openings. And so I applied to National Right to Life. Thankfully, thank God, I think it's one of those providential moments where I ended up going and working with somebody who then became, an influence in my thinking and drove me to the position of, putting principle above politics.
Right.
And so I'm so glad that happened. And maybe we can have that person on the show at some point.
That'd be great. I think that would be marvelous.
Awesome. Well, it's a pleasure speaking with you, Sarah. I hope people found the conversation interesting. Please comment in the comment below. We're going to link the video, right? So you can watch the testimony of Jim Bopp. There's that LifeSite News article that's really great. We'll put that in the show notes. And then also for people, if there's a topic that you want us to discuss, or there's some questions that you have, please do leave those in the comment section, or go to personhood.org and reach out to us. We read all the emails that are sent to us, and we try to respond to them as quickly as we can. And anyways, it's great. I'm happy we're doing this.
Yeah, thanks. Appreciate it.
God bless you. Talk to you soon.